You know, there's a lot of different devices and apparatus used to marking wood turning blanks, and I want to show some of them to you so you can figure out the best way for you to mark centers. So let's start with spindle blanks, larger spindle blanks. If you're a production turner, you'd handle things differently than you would smaller blanks. So let's start with large ones. Let's say you're doing table legs or balusters like this, and you had to mark a lot of them. You want the fastest way because time is money. One way is to use something like this Veritas centering jig. I put it on this block to make it a little easier, and it has this little knife down the middle, and you just center your milled lumber in there and smack it, and then turn it around. And if it's milled lumber, you'd only have to turn it 90 degrees and smack it again, and then you're going to get a mark that crosses over in the middle. But let's say it's not milled perfectly round, in which case probably not the kind of spindle blank you'd use for balusters or something. You'd have to do it 4 times to get that little overlap.
See the short one a little better. And you can see this one crosses exactly in the center because I turned that pretty square, cut it pretty square on a bandsaw.
That's one way to do it. Now, when it comes to marking, you know, basically there's 2 tools you actually do the marking with, and that's either a center punch like this one from Harbor Freight that I added this little palm saver. I've got a video on that if you're interested. It'll be in the show notes. Or a birdcage awl, which has got a special grind to it that makes it very easy to turn a point. I'll have a video to making these birdcage awls. They both work fine. I prefer the center punch because it's got a spring punch. You push it down, you push down, and it springs and it marks the center. And it's fast and easy. You can use an awl and it works. It just takes a little more effort to actually you mark the center, and then you got to kind of spin it a little bit. But you know, they both work. Now, in terms of how do you find the center, that's really the biggest issue here. The way that there are devices you can get. You get this Nova 10-in-1. These things are about 25 bucks, and it's got all these other little jigs for measuring angles and circles and so on. But if you were using something like this, there's actually 2 ways. You put it like this, and then you just mark it, and then you turn it 90 degrees. Keeping the pressure on the same side. Now, if it's perfectly milled lumber, like I showed before, that's all you'd have to do. But in most cases, if you're like me and you turn your blanks on a bandsaw or using a chainsaw, they're not going to be perfectly even. So when you finish, you've got to come around all 4 times, and you're going to wind up with this tiny little square like this. And if your spindle blank is a little bit rectangular, obviously you're going to get a rectangular little square in the middle. Now, devices like this Nova centering, you can get less expensive ones without all the fancy doodads if you just want something to mark centers. It's also used, not only is it used for marking squares. On one side you have a 90 degree and your blank centers in there like that for marking. But if you've got a circle, so doing this with something that's round, you fit it in that channel. I'm going to use a highlighter, felt tip pen, to make it a little easier to see the overlapping marks. Awkward holding it this way for the camera, but and you can see they're not going to perfectly overlap, but it'll give you a pretty good idea where that center is. And a friend of mine gave me this beautiful antique brass centering device, which works very similar to this. Again, because unless the lumber is perfectly milled square, the circles they might not mark exactly in the middle. This one is fairly square, so I've got just not a square, but I can tell where the center is. And this works well on rounds as well as squares. Some wood turners that have come over from flat work might have one of these scratch marking gauges, and they'll use this to mark centers. I have not found this to work
extremely well because sometimes that little sharp point does not work real well on end grain. We have one more side to go. But using a technique very similar to that, I like to use a pencil, and I hold it, I brace my finger so it's in the same kind of relative position that one of these things are. I never change that once I get it braced. Draw a line, draw a line, draw a line, draw a line, and now I have a much smaller circle that is very easily for your eye to catch the center of it, like that. Before we get to large blank though, let me show you my favorite way, and that's doing it by eye. The more you do it, the more accurate you get. You just imagine an imaginary line from one corner to another, and you come down here and cross. And when you finish, it's going to be round. If it's off a 1/16 of an inch, in most cases it's not going to make much difference unless you're using what somebody calls uranium-enriched wood. That is exotic wood from Central South America, Africa, that you're paying several dollars an inch for. Then maybe you don't want to lose even a 30 seconds. But those are all possibilities. Now another approach that somebody uses is, let me show you that real quick. Instead of using a special device like this, they actually just take a ruler and they mark it from corner to corner. And that works well if it's a square. If it's a trapezoid, it won't be perfectly accurate, but if you cut it on your bandsaw roughly square, this will probably work pretty well. But that does take, again, 2 markings, takes an extra device. I find it easier to, again, just use my finger approach, brace it, don't move your position on your thumb, get that small square, and then it makes it for an easy target. If you're doing irregular shaped bowl blanks because they've been cut on a chainsaw and maybe not perfectly round, you may already have a solution, or one that'll do for the time being before you go to the trouble of making an acrylic one, is use one of the bowl cutting templates you've got. Find one that's an appropriate size. I didn't bring all of them over, but this is 13, this is an 8. And do the same thing. You're going to just maneuver this around until you have a most even amount of wood on the around the edges, and press down and mark it. And that works fine. What you don't get to see is the grain, in case that may, or some figure if that made a difference, where you might do it on a blank that's odd even before you cut it round possibly. That's where the acrylic one comes in handy. Now let's go back to larger items. Let's say you're doing between centers work and you've got a log that you're trying to center, not one that's not too large. Now you've got some challenge trying to figure out what the center is, because none of these devices that I've showed you so far work very well. But let me show you one that does. And that's this small acrylic gauge that I made, and I'll show you how to make that shortly. I just put that on, and then I take the largest circle that touches the edges or slightly overlaps, and then I can kind of arrange it where I get the mass of the wood in the center, and then I can go in there and mark center without any trouble. And that works very well, and these are easy to make. Now, let's say you've got a larger blank. Let's say you've got a plate or a bowl blank. How do you mark centers on that if it's not already marked? Well, again, you can make a device like this, which is very similar to that red one I showed you from Nova, except smaller. 90-degree angle, 45 right up the middle. Again, you just press it down in there till it touches on its side. Come around several places, and even if it's a little uneven, if you do it multiple times, you look where most of the marks cross, and that'll be the center. But you can see they're not necessarily going to cross perfectly in the center, so you got to look where most of your marks are close, and that works. The other way is you make you a larger acrylic, and I'll show you how to make this in just a moment. You get a piece of acrylic plastic, and we're going to have these circles scribed on it. You do the same thing on something larger, on a bowl blank. You put it on, you just kind of move it around to either, number one, you find the best grain, which may be more important than centering it, or you actually try to figure out how to even the gap on both sides to get the largest bowl you can possibly make. and then mark the center on that. And the acrylic square works well for large between the centers pieces that you might, like a block like this, that you might make a hollow form or a funeral urn or something like that, and makes it real easy to figure out where's the best center. Now let me show you how to make one of these. So you're going to mount your backer board. I'm assuming you have one of these. If not, it's a great item to make. It's got fun foam on it. This is a high grade plywood, like birch plywood, or Baltic birch, or a high grade cabinet that's got this 1/16 inch closed cell foam on it that you can glue on, and you can either mount it on a faceplate or like in this particular instance on mine, I actually have it threaded, but you can put a faceplate on it or a faceplate ring to fit in your chuck, or as in this case you could put a tenon on it. So you mount that on there, and that soft close-in foam will keep from scratching your piece of acrylic. Now you're going to take your acrylic, and in the center of it, and you can, mark the center, drill a small hole, maybe 5/32 of an inch. I wouldn't get much larger than that because you just want a hole. So you're going to take that acrylic, drill a small hole, maybe about 5/32 of an inch, one that your cone center will easily be able to fit into, but not too large. And just bring up a little bit of pressure on that quill. Bring it up again. Okay. Put just a little pressure on it. Spin it around. Make sure if it's longer than this square that it's going to clear everything, and that you can get your tool rest up against it. Let's make sure it's clear. Whoop. I did this on a different lathe, so let me push this away a little bit more. So get where you can mark it on center, and then all you're going to do is turn this at a very low speed, and you're going to mark a series of concentric circles by either using the corner of your skew, and you want one with all four sides sharpened. That is this bevel, plus this one, and this one, so you get a nice square, sharp tip. Or in my case, I tend to prefer to use a point tool, and you're just going to come in there and scribe a line while it's turning. And you're just going to come in there and mark those series of lines. When you get a series, now frankly you can measure them out very carefully 1 inch apart, but it really doesn't make a lot of difference. You just want a series of lines to help you when you're putting this on a large bowl blank. Then you're going to, where it's scribed, you're going to use a felt tip pen and go in there and fill in those lines with a felt tip pen, and then rub off the excess, so you'll have some dark lines. These probably need to be refreshed a little bit because they haven't been worn off some of the ink. I prefer a large one and a small one. A larger one for bowls, smaller ones for irregular spindle blanks. It's just a little easier to put my fingers on. That doesn't take up as much room to store it. If you're doing irregular shaped bowl blanks because they've been cut on a chainsaw and maybe not perfectly round, you may already have a solution, or one that'll do for the time being before you go to the trouble of making an acrylic one. Is use one of the bowl cutting templates you've got. Find one that's an appropriate size. I didn't bring all of them over, but this is 13, this is an 8. And do the same thing. You're going to just maneuver this around until you have a most even amount of wood on the around the edges, and press down and mark it. And that works fine. What you don't get to see is the grain, in case that may, or some figure if that made a difference, where you might do it on a blank that's odd even before you cut it round possibly. That's where the acrylic one comes in handy. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, a like. That'll make it easier for YouTube to push this video out to other woodturners like yourself. Let me know in the comments below the one tip that you found especially helpful, or the centering technique that you think is going to be of most use to you. And remember, y'all stay safe. Come on back, you hear?